Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Good to see you.
Oh, it's a pleasure, man. I'm excited to have you on. I feel like this is going to be a fun conversation. I can already see some minds exploding in this, and I'm just like, yes, this is what I like. I'm all about shock and awe, so this is going to be fun.
All
But,
right.
but before we get into all that, I'm trying to prep the listeners here just a little bit.
Right. Get ready for the aneurysm, right?
Yeah, exactly. But before we get into that stuff, tell me a little about how did you get into what you're doing?
I shouldn't work for other humans. That's really kind of how they're. I'm a terrible employee.
I understand.
No, I have a history of doing seemingly impossible things, and then later in life I discovered that there's a science to making that happen, and so now I built a career doing this for other people.
So let's talk a little bit. What are some of those, just for the listeners? What's those like? What is something that was people may have thought was impossible, and then you just come along and here you go. Oh, here it is. We did it. And you're like, huh? How'd that happen?
Well, we had a client that it was a one-on-one engagement. I don't do much one-on-one anymore. The clients the coaches that work for me do that. But we had a woman. She's a business owner, and she said that we doubled her revenues, we eliminated her stress, and we saved her marriage. That took 4 months. We had another one. Right, we had another one that was an HR consulting agency, and she said she had 4 goals. She said that she wanted to take her 6-figure business to a 7-figure business. She said she didn't want to work more than about 32 hours a week. She said she wanted to be a digital nomad. She didn't want to be chained to a desk. She wanted to travel all over the place. And then she said, half jokingly, and I'd really like to find the man that someday I'm going to marry. Well, we got all that done in about 9 months.
Love that. So is it a certain strategy? I know there's a science to this you're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. What is that for the listeners who are listening going, I don't know about this. I've heard it before. I don't know. It doesn't work for me. Where do we begin with this conversation on that?
Well, you need to understand that reality itself today is the end result of a system. And any system can be hacked if you understand how that system works. And this is through the lenses of psychology, neurobiology, and energy fields. So right now, most people's lives, even mine, I mean, they're kind of on repeat. Today is pretty much the same as yesterday, and tomorrow is going to be the same as today, because we're going to make something like 33,000 decisions today and have, I think, 70,000 thoughts or something like that. And they're all operating unconsciously on automation. And so when you bring conscious awareness to what is happening inside your mind, well, that's when you can start to make different changes and make different decisions.
I like that. And so I love how you bring this up especially with the energy field. These are things I try to share a lot about to even people I work with, or just sharing on this podcast about how we can, in a sense, you talk about bending. We were talking about this before we came on, bending reality, and sometimes people hear that and they're just like, yeah, no. So there's this system that you have in place that you can utilize. You're talking about the neurobiology, you're talking about the energetic fields and stuff like that. Do we shift our focus and influence on one of those, all of those? How does that kind of play a role without, to give a little bit to the listeners? I know it's a loaded question. I know it's a very loaded question. Totally know the background to that. But like little bite size, just like the cream of the crop on the top or something like that, just to share a little bit.
Okay, so let's just look at this through the lens of neurobiology, right? Everybody has an operating system in their head. Just like a phone or a computer has an operating system, so does a human. The that individual is the sole architect of that system, and it's been running since they were about 6 years old. And we call it a belief system, right? So the way that the loop works is that system generates every single thought that someone has. As soon as they have that thought, conscious or otherwise, they experience it as a feeling. Feelings then drive actions. I know we love to think we're rational, logical, but we're not. Feelings drive actions. That's how humans work. Actions, of course, produce results. And where humans get weird is that the results that we produce are unconsciously pre-designed to validate and support the system that started it. So you got this feedback loop going around and around and around. But you can reverse engineer it. You can, once you bring conscious awareness to how that loop was created, well, you can reverse engineer it. You start with the result that you want and ask yourself, what are the actions that I think will produce that result? What are the feelings that I need to be experiencing to drive those actions? What are the thoughts that I need to think that I will experience as those feelings? And then what's the root system that gives birth to those thoughts? And so you just create a new loop. It's really simple. It's just not easy.
I love how you bring that up. That's something I say a lot because I'm always like, it's this, the the stuff of everything, especially you're talking about neuroscience, neurology, and all that stuff. So it's like I always tell people, neurology is really a simple way to do things, but it's not an easy thing to shift and change. There's processes. So let's talk a little about that the not being easy side. Why is
Mhm.
it not easy?
Well, because the way that we cling to the reality of our understanding is very important to the human, right? I mean, it's all oriented around safety. I mean, generally speaking, humans are more comfortable in a terrible, familiar reality than they are in a wonderful, unfamiliar one.
It's kind of
It's just
crazy.
it's kind of nuts, right? But if you look at like lotto winners 10 years after they win millions of dollars, their lives are a mess, right? Because they've transcended what, their self-concept, and it throws them into basically a world that they don't understand, which feels very chaotic. And then you end up in threat response and you do stupid things because the wrong part of your brain's in charge. So it's all oriented around safety and familiarity.
Yeah, I remember I was listening one time about the brain, and it was talking about like there's a certain level of like uncomfortableness that we got to get to, but if it's like right underneath our line, we will be okay with that and keep that and
Mhm.
not make a change until it gets to that certain point, and then we're like, okay, no more of this. I can't deal with it. I need to do something, or something has to change. Something has to. I'm done in
Yeah.
some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, there's a quote something like that. It says something like when the pain of when the fear of change becomes less than the pain of staying the same, or something like that, right? And so it's, I mean, and that's kind of what it was for me. I didn't want to, when I went off on some of the crazy ideas that I've had in my life, I had to know the answer. It was like, I'm not gonna be sitting here 10 years from now wondering what if. I had to try something.
And I could totally understand that and respect that because that's kind of how I am in my own way in my own life. It's just always just like I don't want to have a what if ever.
Hmm.
So and I probably will. There's always a time you look back and you're like, I could have did this a little bit more. I could have did here, but I'm like, in the present moment, I'm like, I'm going as 100% as much as I can and everything in direction what I want to do. But it's one of those things where talking about what we're chatting on the system again. So we talked about the feedback system with the brain, right? It has
Hmm.
to always validate. This is what reality is. What are some things that other things in that system that we can influence or change or shift? We talk about the energetic body, energetic
Hmm.
fields, and stuff like that. I love talking that world. So if you don't mind, just sharing a little bit of that.
Yeah, I grew up. My father, he's an interesting individual. He never went to college. He barely graduated high school, and he built his career as an electromagnetic compatibility engineer. And so growing up with him was different. Like, we didn't talk baseball, that was not my dad. Dad was all about energy fields and quantum mechanics and subatomic physics and string theory and all the things, right? So I kind of so but what ends up happening is, and you can, even in your own speech patterns, as you start to analyze what you say and how you say it, it has an effect on your emotional body and obviously your psychological body. Ultimately, this can have a change in your neurochemistry depending on how you phrase something, which ultimately has an effect on your energy field. And as you know, everything is energy, everything. Right. I mean, the desk that I'm standing in front of right now, it feels like solid matter, but it's like 90 something percent empty space. There's like nothing here. And so it's just compressed energy, and energy operates in frequencies, right? It's all bandwidths. And so when you start to match the frequency of who you are with the thing that you want, you start to bring it to you. It starts to manifest in your reality. This is what the woo-woo clan calls the law of attraction. This is, but we can also run it through the lens of subatomic physics. Just what package would you like to discuss this under?
Totally. So let's talk a little bit about that though, because I hear this all the time. Like, people say like, just got to change your energy to this frequency, right, to achieve this type of life. But my question has always been, I was having a conversation just a few weeks ago with someone on this, and I was like, yeah, but what's that frequency and how you know you're at that energy? Like, what's that frequency to be like, yep, that attracts this 7-figure business, or this attracts this type of person? Because I'm like, I have a different way of approaching things, but it's just it. I love to ask that question to you.
That's a good question, because how do you embody a frequency that you don't really know what it is, right? And there are any number of ways to start experimenting with this in the physical world reality. Like, one of the ones that I think most people have heard is dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Right? You put on a different jacket, you put on different clothes, it has an effect on how we feel, and this starts to adjust the frequency, right? So, and it's sort of a maybe some guesswork, I suppose. What's the frequency of the thing I want? I know that things have happened in my life when I felt it. Like I could just feel it. I knew it was coming. I have a call later with that. I know it's a done deal. Like it's going to be one of the biggest engagements. Actually, I think it's the biggest engagement that our organization will have ever taken on. And it's a done deal. I can feel it.
That's where I kind of come from. I always talk about the feeling because we can't mentally know, but we can feel it, and there's a certain vibe and energy to that feeling. And when you can, this is how it shows up in the body. That you'll be like, when you get to that point and just know that how that feels, then you'll know. Like you just know. You're like, I know it's a done deal. This is it. And I know how that feels. Like sometimes I'll be working with patients, and I'm like, I'm going before I even get like once they leave. Back in when I had my office, and my wife would be like, the patient left, and I'd be like, they're signed up, they're going to be with us, we're good. And she'd be like, how do you know? I'm like, I just know. Or I know, hey, this patient, I feel like they're going to be leaving soon. It's just going to happen. And I'm always ahead of it. So it's not like it's going to happen the next day. All of a sudden, it'll be like a month later. And I'm always like, why do these things come? I like them to come. I always say, I'm like, can you come a little later? So when I feel it, I know it's coming up soon. Because I'll ask sometimes, I'll be like, because I had a coach who was like, if you feel that, ask them. Yeah, everything's been great. I love being here and all this. I'm like, all right, what I'm feeling and what they're telling me, those are two different realities. And then all of a sudden, I'm like, a month later, I'm going, there it goes. This is what happened in their life. There they go. Man, I'm like, why am I tapping? I'm like, whatever. It is what it is.
It's sort of like a tidal wave in a way. I'll analogize it this way. When a tidal wave is coming because all of a sudden the water at the beach starts to pull way out, right? Something is happening. You can see that's and you don't see the tidal wave coming yet, but if you're ever on the beach and the water starts to recede quickly, you're in trouble, right? Something's coming. But look, I've experienced this, and I'm sure somebody listening right now has experienced it. They knew they were going to get fired from a job. They just felt it coming, right? And that's kind of the water on the beach being pulled back. You feel it, you see it. Something has happened in the energetic field. The roadmap is kind of simple, actually. The physical world reality is the last thing that happens in the chain. The first thing that happens is up in the energetic and in the frequency, and it travels through time and space, right, into the physical realm, because again, physical world reality is the slowest moving, right? It's compressed energy, right? So you start, I think if you have some kind of sensitivity to this, you'll feel those things coming. You know that something is coming. And you generally, humans in my experience have an idea of what that might be. Whether it's a relationship beginning or ending or a career change or something, they feel it coming, and we've all said, I knew that was going to happen.
Especially that it's always fun. Like you just say it. It's like, oh man, I knew that was coming. Dang it. No, I love that, and I know you bring up a lot of the quantum physics stuff, and I love talking quantum physics, and it's one of those things where we're talking about bending reality here a little bit, and it is when we're looking at shifting our reality to create that life that we talked about the neural stuff and whatnot. We talked a little about energetic. That's probably the quantum side. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's just I want to put a lens of quantum physics on there because there are some people who will be listening to this going, it's still not there, And I'm always like, if they feel that way, let's bring the science in then, and that way it's like, here you go. Now, if you don't believe it from this point, or you're not like saying it may be potentially for you. I don't know what else to tell you now. I've given you the science. But when it comes to bending reality, I call it we're spiritual alchemists, and that we can transmute energy into any way, shape, or form. Something bad can happen. We can take that energy, spin it to the positive, and be like, that's what's going to mean for me, and that's going to be the way I'm going to see things. And not ignoring what's reality, like not ignoring like other things. Like some people, like Tony Robbins said this one time, like, I'm not telling you to look at the grass and ignore the weeds. Like you got to look at the weeds and pay attention to them. And I agree with that 100%, but it's you choosing what the reality is going to be for you, regardless what your grass has, how many weeds it has, or whatever it looks like.
Yeah. I and you are going to attract what you focus on, right? What we focus on expands. I mean, we know this through physics. We know this, looking at an object has a physical effect on that object at the subatomic level. We can measure it. Right? We know that's true. We know that you can gain muscle mass, that you can lose weight by thinking about it, right? This is why visualization techniques are so effective, because if you can visualize something, without it setting off, like it can't set off the internal bullshit detector, right? It's got to be it's got to be a little bit, it's got to be believable enough. But when we start visualizing something, we start creating that reality because we move into that frequency.
Totally. Yeah, and 100% there. And it's one of the, I'm a big person of vision, because I'm like, if you can't visualize it, you're not gonna create it in your life in some way, shape, or
Mm-hmm.
form. But let's take, like, you had that one client, you're talking about 6 figures to go to 7 figures, marriage, this, or finding the person,
Mm-hmm.
all those things. And is when the work that you do, is there a way where you're like, you got to get that person to see their life totally different? Or is it visualization work that you have them do? Is it depending on the person? How does that process kind of look?
There are a lot of tools. The step one is general, and there's no like regimented process in my organization. It's sort of like, okay, day one, here's the tool where we're going to start, and then after that, it goes in any number of directions based on the client. I will say this much though: nothing happens without 100% responsibility for everything. I mean, everything. Like everything in your world, when you take responsibility, and let me define that word as ownership. Responsibility is not fault, right? So it's like their fault, my fault. This is nonsense, right? Ownership. I'm taking full ownership of everything in my reality. Even my childhood, right? Like none of my childhood is as dramatic and traumatic as it was. None of it was my fault. All of it is my responsibility, right? It's a different thing. And so when I put somebody in the driver's seat of their life like that, well, now you can do whatever you want. And so but it is a function, and we don't have time for offloading responsibility in any way, shape, or form. That's not how to bend reality.
I totally agree with you there. And taking ownership is that, because a lot of times in today's society, especially, I mean, it's just, look at the conditioning. It's all about victimhood, and look what happened to
Mm-hmm.
you in this stage of your life. And, so sorry you had to go through that. And it's like, I always tell people, like, everything that happens in your life was for a divine purpose in some way, shape, or form. You can call it divine if you want. You can say it's just a purpose. You can say it's a soul. At the end of the day, it's what works for you. But the things were set up in a certain way. Like, like I always say, when I was younger, I had this. Don't ask me why I thought this way, but I'm like, why did I end up? I'm from Chicago originally, so I'm like, why did I end up in the suburbs of Chicago in a small Italian community, being Italian, being male, having these parents, having these grandparents, great grandparents, the whole system. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why here and right now versus Africa or Asia or Australia?
Mm-hmm.
Why wasn't I chosen to go there? And why at this time frame in life and where humanity is?
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people, when you start asking those questions, you start to say, there's a purpose why I'm here at this time and shape and form.
Mm-hmm.
And everything's here to support you and not be, a victim to anything. You can choose that and live that reality, because it's how powerful you are.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can choose the other and see what that leads to, how you can choose what your experience, what you want. Choose that, choose the experience that you want to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's sort of like looking at a stage. That's, the stage is set kind of thing. It's like, okay, here's what's on the stage of the theater. And we can ask that question, well, why this theater? Why this stage? Why is that couch there and the chair and whatever happens to be on the stage? And I don't spend a lot of time in the why, because again, when we look through the lens of responsibility, it's like, look, I don't really give a shit why. What are you going to do with it? I mean, clients call me and I tell them, look, I am not going to dig around in your childhood. If you really want to know why you are the way you are, I can do that, but I don't care. And I know that sounds terribly insensitive, right? It's like, yeah, but this happened when I was a kid. I don't care, because I'm going to deal with it the same way. If you really want to know why, I can go do that. But if you can sort of skip that part, we can move a lot faster. It's, what do you want to do with this? Because we can go anywhere.
And I think that's how we really bend reality. I mean, that's when you
That's it.
really start to, I think that's the secret sauce to it all. In the
Yeah.
essence of that, you're now taking it again. Spiritual alchemist. That's the way. I don't know why that term. I had someone on a podcast
It's a beautiful
that said
term. I love it.
it's not mine. Someone else. I was on a podcast and they said, and I was interviewing them and they said that, and I go, "That's it, spiritual alchemist. I love that. Do you mind if I borrow that?" Like, it's not ours. I'm like, all right, beautiful. I'm going to use that.
Didn't trademark it.
Yeah, trademark. I'm using it. But no, it's one of those things you think about, because it's the same thing I was sharing earlier. It's like you take that energy and what do you want to do with it? Right? Because here it is.
Yeah.
Here's the event. Right? Here's the trauma. Here's this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to make out of that?
Yeah.
And how do you want to help that define you?
Right. I mean, and I've done this a number of times in my life, and I get real Hamlet here. Nothing, for nothing is either good nor bad. Thinking makes it so, right? If you like it, it's good. If you don't like it, it's bad. It's a subjective construct. It's just, what am I going to do with it? And, I decided when I was 21, my roommate was a college ice hockey player. I was at a junior college. And I said, that looks like a lot of fun. I want to do that. And there were only two things in my way. Number one, I was failing out of my junior college. And number two, I had never skated before. So at 21 years old, I decided I'm going to be an NCAA ice hockey player. 18 months later, I was leading that team in the state championships. I was fourth in goals and first in assists.
That's awesome, man.
Like, you
what a
can
story,
do
man.
anything. Like, when you align, here's the magic. I'll give you the magic right now. There's what I call, there's commitment and there's devotion. Now, for me, commitment is very mental, very choice driven, very kind of masculine in its energy. I am choosing to do this. Go, do, execute, achieve. I'm committing to this. Devotion is a much more feminine quality for me in the frequency of the word. I'm going to get a little woo here. But it's that thing that I just fall on my knees in reverence of, in just in the true sense of the word devotion. Now, when I take my commitment and I marry it to my devotion and I attach it to a vision, I don't know how you fail when you do that. I really don't. I was devoted to my radio career when I trashed a 6-figure marketing career and said I want to be a radio DJ, which is a terrible idea. But I was both committed to making that happen and completely devoted to the thing. Same thing with hockey, the same thing with this company. I was broke. I was living out of my trunk. I mean, literally, I wasn't even building this company out of a garage. I didn't have a garage. I didn't have a house. I didn't have an apartment. I had the trunk of my car. I'm like, so don't tell me what can't be done, right? I'm not trying to hear that. I'm just a hard no. I'm a hard no to what can't be done.
I love it. Are we as humans, based on all your experiences and all your knowledge and everything, are we truly limitless?
I choose to believe so, because if I believe that I'm limitless, I may find a limit, but it's going to be a whole lot farther out there than if I believe whatever that limit is, right? Like, I train with retired Navy SEALs, and they'll tell you can do 20 times more than you think you can. If your life depended on it, it's like, you think you can run a mile, you can run 20, guaranteed.
It's great. I mean, even if my understanding of the body as a chiropractor, it's like the muscle strength you have is only a third. So whatever you can max at is actually only the third of the potential. The body doesn't utilize the max unless, whatever, like a 100-pound mom has their baby stuck under a car. How the heck do they lift that thing 3,000, 4,000 car up like nothing?
Right.
Not even thinking, right? That's the power there.
My body's gonna be like, okay, that's responses, whether they're physical or whether they're mental. When you push through those conditioned responses, this is when you make magic happen, right? Like, this is when you get runner's high and whatever. You just push through all those things that tell you to stop, and then you're crushing it.
I couldn't agree more with that. Even from the observer effect with the quantum physics and so forth, it's it's what we're how we look at things is what it becomes. And if we see limits, then we're going to experience limits. But if we don't see any limits, maybe I would say, like, you may have some, you may hit some walls, but it's not a limit. It's just, you just got to figure things. It's a challenge it's like a video game. I was talking this with a friend of mine. It made perfect sense. It was like, every level that you play in a video game really doesn't get harder per se. Now, some people say, yes, it does. I said, well, hold on here. You've built experience with it. So I think every has difficulty regardless. Every level does. It's just the experience as you go. It's like, oh, here's another challenge we're going to have. But we got this. We've gone through 172 levels. All right, it's just another one I got to keep hacking away at until I eventually get there.
Yeah. Can you match your skill set to the challenge? I mean, that's really what. And honestly, that's when the challenge is a little bit more than our perceived skill set. That's when we do really well.
Is it because we get into a place of uncertainty, and now we can't let our mind mess with us, so that when it's more than what our skill set is, then we, like, all of a sudden have to pull out. It's kind of like, I think of it in sports. Like, I played baseball for 25 years, and it was always one of those things where it's amazing what would show up out of me in playoff time when we were challenged. I don't know why I played better in the playoffs. I don't know if it's I can't give you any answers. I've tried figuring it out. I'm just more focused, but I'm just more whatever it is. But the level of the teams we're playing were a lot harder. And I'm sitting there going, well, never went against a guy who threw 93 miles per hour. It's going to be fun. Okay, let's see how that goes. And I just not let my mind get there, and I just be in the moment. Then all of a sudden I come out of it, and I'm like, And I did good. I went 3 for 4. We won the game. This happened. I was like, how the hell did this all happen?
Yeah.
And try not to judge it along the way.
Well, there's a science to that too, right? Because what happens in the playoffs is that the stakes get higher, everything gets elevated, right? And so this is when we start talking about flow specifically, right? There's a guy, I mean, you're from Chicago. There's a guy, University of Chicago, named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Don't ask me to spell that. But he's kind of known as the godfather of flow. But flow is what athletes call being in the zone or runner's high or whatever, right? Give it whatever name you want. Basketball players call it going unconscious, right? But this is all driven by neurochemistry. And so it's a function of setting the conditions and the circumstances so that there are as many what we call flow triggers involved in the experience. And so when you start talking about the playoffs, when the stakes are higher, well, the challenge skills balance is a little bit higher. There's more novelty. There's more focused attention. There's probably more passion. There's more intensity. So there's an increase in your focus. It's actually scarier. It's riskier. You might lose it all. So now you're in, there's a risk involved. These are all flow triggers. There are 22 flow triggers that we know of right now. But the more of these that happen in an experience, the better the chance you're going to get into flow. And so when you get into the playoffs, there's more of these triggers, and now you're in the flow, and now you're doing better, and blah, blah, blah.
Oh, totally. And for me, it's always an intensity, because that's where it is, shows up in business. When I can have that intensity, then all of a sudden it's like, game on, let's go. This is fun. This is where I enjoy it more.
Yeah.
So.
There was a movie, I don't remember the movie. It was a Matt Damon movie, and he was playing an attorney. And there was a judge. He was like a young attorney, and the judge looks at this kid and he says, "Son, are you in over your head?" And Matt Damon, as this young attorney, looks up, and he got this big grin on his face. Says, "Absolutely." Like, yes, that, right? Like, yes, I'm in over my head, and I couldn't love it more, right?
Totally. I love it. Chris, I got to talk to you all day, brother. Tell me, how can people follow you, find your work, and everything that you're up to?
Thank you so much. Yeah, we set up a page just for your listeners. So it's our website, statusflow.net /the mindful experiment. That's where they can find everything. They can check out our podcast there. We got the Get Unstuck program. So, if somebody's stuck into something, we'll get them unstuck and get them moving forward. But it's all right there. Statusflow.net, the mindful experiment.
Awesome, brother. I appreciate you taking the time to be on. This was a blast. I could talk to you all day, and just love what you're up to. But thanks for sharing some wisdom with us today here, and just taking time. Appreciate it, brother.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
And if I can see